I was an early 20s male and I still had never been in a relationship, nor have I ever had any real discussion come up with my family about my romantic life, in part because I was too embarrassed by it. But that summer, a couple of my friends had recently come out as gay, and I mentioned it to my parents while I was visiting home. Later that night, my mum somehow started on a "we'll love you regardless" sermon. While in a way comforting, it was also embarrassing because there I was, a full-grown 23-year-old man, having his mother openly acknowledge his innocence and effectively tell me she thought I hadn't brought anyone home because I was gay. On top of that, my dad is perhaps a bit more uneasy with homosexuality. He wouldn't kick one of his kids out or disown them for being gay, but I imagine he'd struggle to hide some disappointment. He was there for this conversation and he was visibly tense during it. After he went to bed, I turned off the TV and had a 10-minute conversation with my mum in which I had to explain to her that I was not in fact gay, but simply socially inept. It took 10 minutes because she spent the entire time continuing her "we'd love you regardless" stance. I said, "Mum, I'm straight and you're kind of freaking Dad out." And my mum said, "But if you weren't straight, we'd still love you." That's great, but it's irrelevant because I'm straight. But if it wasn't irrelevant, it'd still be okay. 2 years later, I was finally in a relationship with a girl. In short, I had to come out to my mother as being straight. Well, my mum found my personal toy collection, so there's that. I had to tell my septuagenarian grandparents that I may have given them crabs. My grandmother just decided to get new linens and toilet seats that day, and my grandfather just shrugged it off and said, "I guess I'd better shave it back like I did in Korea." When I got my period for the first time, I sent my mom an email. "Mom, Dad, you're gonna want to sit down for this. I'm adopted. I'm bulimic and I can't stop and I need help." I'm sure that isn't what my mom wanted to hear her 24-year-old son tell her. "Mom, why is there a schlong on my bathroom floor?" Apparently, the cat dug a toy out of my parents' hiding place in their bathroom and left it for me to find in my bathroom. The worst part was my mom was saying, "Oh dear God, I hope it's not the two-headed one." So I don't really know who it was more awkward for. I had to admit to my parents that I'd been constipated for a long time. There's no appropriate time to bring that up without being abrupt. Pretty much had to walk into the kitchen and say, "I'm constipated," and let all of the questions ensue. "You're full of crap." I had to tell my mum that I had warts down there because I didn't know what the frick to do about them. I was 19 and just freaking out. Surprise number one was that I'd done the deed. Surprise number two was that I had not just those warts but also in the butt. So like 2 hours later, when I realized I'd told my mum I had warts in my butt, I was awkwardly like, Mom, it's not because he put it in there." Definitely a moment of oversharing, and I still cringe over this. Well, since so many of you in the comments apparently enjoy hearing about it when it happens, we've officially reached the story that makes the narrator gag. So, well done, Warty McButtface. Ugh. Seriously though, not really your fault. I just can't stop thinking about how going number 2 through those must feel. And I've doubled over again. No. Thank you. As an 18-year-old, I had to get my mum's advice on lubricant. Doing the deed was extremely painful and I felt like there was too much traction down there. The conversation was heck of awkward, but she did give me some advice. Not me, but my older brother. Not sure how old he was, and I was just a wee kid. My brother had his first wet dream, and he woke up and noticed the splooge on his wang, and freaked out. Only my grandma was home, while my uncle also came home for a visit. My brother told them directly what happened, and my uncle decided to mess with him and told him he was going to die. My brother freaked out more and started yelling, "I'm gonna die!" I didn't really remember the details, being little at the time. All I remember was my brother seeing something in his pants and yelling that he was gonna die. Nowadays, as adults, my grandma for some reason would keep bringing up that story in family get-togethers right in my brother's face. I also remember her telling this to his wife the first time. On average, I'd hear this story once or twice a year. Every time my sister introduces a new boyfriend home to us, she tells it. Every relative who comes to us, she tells it. Never knew or understand why my grandma would keep telling the story. It wasn't until I was a bit older that I understood the story, and I cracked up every time she told it. My friend had to call his mum from the principal's office and tell her he wrote John Hart's The Eggplant on his own binder. He was trying to get someone else in trouble and then remembered he had a conscience. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had to tell mine that my brother and I could no longer sleep in our bunk beds after he met his hot girlfriend. He had the top bunk and would sneak her home at night after he thought I was asleep. Their motion made the bunk beds rock, and I couldn't stay asleep with the moaning and motion. When I was 16 and I got fired from my job at the supermarket because I stole 2 quarts of ice cream. Or when I was 5 and I stole the entire block of cheese out of the fridge intending to eat the whole thing. I felt sick after about a third and then I hid it behind the bed until it got so smelly I had to tell them to move the bed because it wasn't a mouse in the wall, just cheese. Both were highly embarrassing and upsetting at the time, and I'm realizing after writing this that I apparently have food theft issues. I had to come out to my 90-year-old grandmother, who I was living with, and told her that I was gay in front of her mahjong friends in order to explain my date, during which I lost my shoes and wallet in the woods, and that's why I needed $7 to buy a pair of Goodwill sneakers so I could go to work? I was 24. I was about 6 weeks from my due date when I started bleeding. What the frick? Long story short, everything was fine. I was a smidge dilated, but okay, as was my kiddo. So the OB asks me if, outside of OB appointments, I've inserted anything into my downstairs area or done the deed. I admitted I'd done the deed nearly a week prior, but I wasn't told not to, as my pregnancy was progressing just fine. The OB says, okay, that's probably what it was, and advises me to err on the side of caution and refrain a bit. Okay, fine. She leaves to get my discharge papers. My mum is staring daggers into my skull, and I'm seriously like, is there something on my face, Mum? And she started screaming about how my then-husband is a jerk, and how dare he make me do the deed, etc., etc., and I was like, Mum, he didn't make me do anything. And she's like, why would you want to? She's simultaneously annoyed, disgusted, mystified, and embarrassed by her pregnant adult daughter having pregnant adult fun 32 weeks gone. Fast forward 4.5 years, my brother's girlfriend is 4 days past her due date, and wouldn't you know it, the first piece of advice to pop out of my mum's mouth was, go do the deed, that'll get her out of there. And I'm like, whoa there, it's okay for her to do it, but I'm an embarrassment? And her response, yes, but this is necessary. You wanted it. Every now and again, she's got her backwards thinking moments. I was back on spring vacation from college. At the time, my girlfriend and I had just split up. I had a one-night stand with a girl I met online. Here's where it gets bad. We were a little drunk and my parents weren't home when I got back. We made our way to the guest room, shedding clothes the whole way. We did the deed and passed out. Apparently my mum collected the trail of clothes and left them outside the door. She also walked past my parents on the way out in the morning. I hadn't woken up yet. Here's where it gets worse. I stupidly had gone bareback. A week or so later, I started to get some concerning symptoms. I had to basically tell my dad that I barebacked some random chick, and now I had to go to the doctor because I probably have mega super transmissible diseases. I had a UTI. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to try and repurge that memory from my brain. My mother found a wrapper for a Jimmy in my room. I was trying it on to make sure that I knew what I was doing. I didn't enjoy explaining that to my mother. You know, coming out as trans was pretty bad. It was super cringeworthy, and for the next week, my mom kept making awkward comments about girly stuff, as if to say, wink wink, nudge nudge, you're a girl now. Honestly, my parents both did the exact same thing when I came out to them. But nothing was funnier than when my dad and I were watching the news together, and he was going on about how hot the weatherwoman was, when he just stopped and said, Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, I forgot, you're a girl. I told him, yeah, and I've had girlfriends for over a year now. He just stayed silent for a few seconds before mumbling, so you're a lesbian? Telling mine that I had depression and thoughts of self-deletion. I was almost not able to tell them because I didn't want them to worry about me. That I kinda sorta set a gas station on fire. It was really only a couple of gas pumps out by some abandoned garages, and it honestly was an accident, but it was quite embarrassing. Actually, the most embarrassing part was that the guy on the motorcycle who had seen the fire from the road and came over to put it out, escorted me home and made me tell my parents. That was embarrassing, especially since my father was the biker's guidance counselor. Awkward. Well, at least your father had a pretty good indication that he was doing his job right and setting this man on the right tracks to solve problems when he saw them. Good on your dad and the random biker for being such diligent and community-minded souls. I had to explain to mine that the reason I was coming home for the weekend was because my husband had shoved me during an argument. We were together for 10 years before getting married. Mum and Dad both put a lot of money into the wedding. Not a ton of money by normal standards, but a lot of money by our family's standards. I moved home a month later, and I'm currently getting divorced. But I'll never forget the dread I felt telling my mum why I was leaving him. I thought I was smarter than that. Yes, we're doing the deed. No, we're not a couple. Telling mine the first time I got a bladder infection, because everyone knows darn well that likely means inexperienced deed-doing. Went out rollerblading the one time. I had to come home and tell my parents I was gay. When I asked mine, "What's your first name?" Coming out to my parents as a drag queen. It didn't go too badly. My dad accepted it better than when I told him I was bi, but the subsequent question and answer session was awkward as heck. I was messing around with inserting things while flicking the bean. When I was about 12, all of a sudden I feel a ripping sensation and blood comes pouring out. I freaked out and had to tell my mum that I was doing it with a magic marker. She just laughed at me. She likes to bring that one up at random family dinners 10 years later. Fun times. The neck massager she found in my room was actually a massager for a different thing. Just kidding, I never told her. Screw that. When I told mine I was dating an Indian girl. This hasn't happened yet, but I'd surely be screwed if my mum sees the things that I linked on Reddit. This happened to me when I was in 8th standard. I was painfully awkward near girls, hence I never had the guts to talk to my crush about my feelings. My crush was extremely smart, rated over smart by my mum, active and vivacious. Of course she was cute. My mum was aware of my infatuation with her because she had once discovered a Valentine's Day card in my bag, which I'd planned to give her but couldn't. My mum wasn't very happy with that since, according to her, I should focus myself on making myself a better person rather than engaging in meaningless pursuits, and she actually blamed my crush for that. Probably she was just jealous because my crush was much more accomplished than I was. So one day, my crush calls me and I pick up the landline. My heart was already in my mouth. I tried to act cool and was talking to her. Somehow, my mum, call it her sixth sense or my apparent excitement over the phone, comes to know who I'm talking to. My crush says, "So, have you done the assignment yet? Actually, I've lost my notebook and I was wondering if you had seen it." "No, I haven't completed the assignment. Sorry to hear that. Where did you..." Then suddenly, "Why are you talking to that girl? I told you to stay away from her. Put the phone down now," came my mum's shrill voice behind me. I was so freaked out and embarrassed that I put the phone down that instant. I didn't have the guts to call her back. I had a big fight with my mum and sulked all day. The next day, I got to go to my crush and apologize to her about the matter. She handled it very well. The day after that, my mum invited her over to our house to make up for it. She felt guilty about it too, but things were never the same between me and my crush again, and we barely talked. Needless to say, she never called me again. I was 5 or 6 years old, playing in my room, trying to squeeze into small spaces to make my secret hiding place. I did not know how boy and girl bits worked. As I was crawling under the bed, halfway under, my little Johnson snuck into itself. I ran out of there as fast as I could, and I started frantically telling both my parents, who were watching the news in the living room, that my wee-wee had disappeared. They started laughing, and even to this day, 22 years later, the story does not cease to be told at family parties. I crashed my Cherokee into a concrete barrier. Okay, well maybe not crashed, but more like firmly bumped. I was driving home late one night in winter. It had done that weird thing where it rained just enough to put a sheen on the road, and they hadn't even thrown out the soles just yet. So long story short, I took an S-bend a little too tight, spun out, and hit the concrete barrier head on. Hard enough to send everything in the back seat onto my lap and lurch the passenger seat into the glove box. also hard enough to cause enough cosmetic damage to pinch the hood shut and dent the passenger side quarter panel. Hardly noticeable if you didn't look too hard. The old dog stalled because I let the clutch out, but started back up and got me back home. I wasn't going to tell my parents until the whiplash set in 2 days later and I couldn't turn my head. I went to them crying that my head was stuck because I crashed my old Jeep. I was expecting a talking to and I got laughed at instead. Seriously? The car looks fine. Are you okay though? We pulled out the dings with a hand winch, a sledgehammer, and a crowbar. Everything in the engine bay was perfectly fine, thanks to a huge bull bar that I had in the front. I went to the chiropractor and life continued. Sadly, I had to sell that old dinosaur a couple of months ago for something newer. Probably not the safest car in terms of no airbags, and it was built in '89, but still the best car I'd ever had. I was 18 and it was Christmas night. I started getting really sick. Some kind of stomach virus, and I thought I was dying. Ended up crapping in the bed. It was very awkward when I woke up at 6 a.m. in wet boxers and waddled into my parents' room to tell them. I've had to tell mine that I've been going through the divorce from hell for the last 2 years. I thought it was embarrassing when I had to tell my dad about it 2 years ago, but I've more or less run through my savings, so tomorrow I need to call him and ask if I can borrow money to pay my attorney fees and alimony. What was the stupidest reply to a serious question that you've ever heard? I was a nanny when I was in college for this very bizarre family who always pretended like I wasn't there. I was walking down the street with the mother and her 2 kids. It was February and the sun glare was really bad, so naturally I was wearing sunglasses. One of the kids, about 4, asked his mother why I was wearing sunglasses in winter, and the mother responds, "Well, some people are not that smart and they just want to look cool." Please note, both parents were professors at an Ivy League college. My friend was a second-year medical student and she was walking through the main floor of our hospital in scrubs. She was stopped by a passerby asking for directions and she was asked, "Hey, where's PET-CT?" She said, I think there's one in the nearby mall." The man looked at her confused and was like, "The PET-CT is in the mall?" And she replies, "Yeah, like the second floor, I think. It's not called Pet City though, it's called Pet World, I think." Do you think I'm looking for the pet store?" 2 years of medical education and common sense returned to her in that moment and said, "Oh my god, you mean the scan? No, it's down that hall on the right. I'm so sorry." He shook his head, walking away, and we heard him say, "I wish I was looking for a frickin' pet store." Was in college and went to the calculus study hall to see if I could learn something. One of the problems was something like, a man throws a ball on the moon at a speed of X miles per hour at an angle of Y degrees. How long before the ball comes down? The response from the teacher's assistant, who was a PhD candidate in math, "That's a stupid question. Everyone knows there's no gravity on the moon." I never went back. I'm an astronomer. Before we were married, my soon-to-be wife asked me, "How can there be dust on the moon when there's no gravity?" I asked her in genuine curiosity what made her think there was no gravity on the moon. She closed her eyes and went, "Oh, duh." She keeps bringing it up years afterwards, despite my continued reassurance that there are no dumb questions. But she doesn't believe me. I love that woman. I actually kind of love that last one, because even if it shows some basic ignorance or a preconceived notion, it does display enough knowledge or logical capacity to be able to work through and correct yourself. Now, if only more people could admit they were wrong and react to criticism that way instead of knee-jerk reactions. Me, when I was writing a construction bid, is the standard flooring on these units going to be tile or vinyl? The client said, yellow. My high school had a geography bee where one kid was asked what the capital of France was, and he replied, Spain. In my high school physics class, the teacher asked what was the unit for time. This girl screamed, kilograms. After that, you could see the teacher lost hope on all of us. Back in India, my company had hired a motivational speaker to give a speech at an event. There were 300-odd people, with senior people of HR also in the audience. Everyone was bored, but the lady instructor kept on going on how to build self-confidence. Sensing that people weren't interested, she started getting the audience involved. I, being a backbencher as always, did not care about it at all. I thought she'd stay in the front. I was feeling sleepy and not paying attention to it. After some time, I saw her coming to the back. She suddenly stopped next to me and asked, "Are you motivated?" I wasn't sure what was going on, and I answered, "No, I'm Dave." Half the crowd started laughing. She was taken aback by my answer and didn't know how to respond to this. She didn't come to the back to ask questions after that. When accused of nepotism after giving his son an important role as a politician, Brazil's president said, "He has to be someone's son. Why can't it be mine?" Truly an argument you can't fight back. It was actually me who said the dumb reply. This was when I was younger, by the way. And yeah, I realize that everything is when I was younger. Specifically, this happened about 2 years ago. And yes, I'm still a socially awkward idiot. I was just more of one back then. I was texted by a friend saying, "Can I take a rain check?" A few minutes later, I texted back, "Nope, no rain." I had literally checked the weather for the day. I was a socially awkward idiot, so yeah. In physics, there's something called the right-hand rule, which helps you find the direction of force given the direction of the magnetic and electric fields. It's a little hard to explain how exactly, but you literally use your right hand as a model. My professor asked me in front of the class what the first thing you needed to identify in order to use the rule was. I panicked and answered, "Your right hand?" In law school, we had a free clinic for qualifying and lower-income people to come in. We couldn't technically advise them because we weren't barred yet, but we could guide and try to help them through some complex issues they might not have a handle on. One guy came in and wasn't even my case, but being done by a classmate next to me during a session. The man, dead-faced and scared, said, "Would filing for bankruptcy ruin my life?" The girl, flustered on how to answer, said, well, it looks like your life is already pretty bad." We were discussing about Antarctica, and some guy casually said, stone cold face, "You don't actually believe Antarctica is a real place, right?" Full disclosure, I was the idiot in this conversation, but in my early 20s. I was at a friend's small gathering, and I was chatting with my friend and some guy I'd never met before. Asked where he grew up, he said, "DC," to which I replied, "Oh, I didn't realize people actually lived there." I knew it was stupid as soon as it was coming out of my mouth, but I also kind of thought it was a district, like the financial district, and people went there for work, but lived just outside of it. Worst part was that even though I was fresh out of college, I was working in a local political office, and these were folks from state legislative offices, so I should have known better. They laughed at me for a while. At work, a customer asked one of our chefs where the fish comes from. He pointed to the kitchen and said, "It just kinda comes through that door." This guy is the kind of guy who wouldn't think to make a joke like that. He has an absolute heart of gold, but unfortunately, he is actually that thick. I once got asked by him if a pot of obviously boiling water was hot and had to stop him from just dipping his hand in there, when my sarcastic answer was to dip his finger in and check. That is freaking adorable, if a little sad. Just a big old dopey sheepdog of a man. And this guy who's apparently ready to jam his hand into scalding liquid is a chef? Does he still have all of his fingers? Because if he does, that's a frickin' miracle.